Welcome to the debate. I'm the advocate.
And I'm the dissenter.
Imagine for a moment a map of the world. And now let's overlay that map with a heat map of survival probabilities for a sudden cardiac arrest. It is early 2026, and what we're seeing is this fascinating global experiment. If you collapse on a sidewalk in Los Angeles, the machinery that springs into action is just fundamentally different, medically and financially, than if the same thing happens in a Beijing subway or a Taipei night market.
Oh, it's a massive divergence. We used to think of emergency medical services, EMS, as a fairly standard thing. Someone calls, an ambulance comes, they take you to the hospital. But the actual philosophies driving those systems have completely split. On one side, you have this push for absolute simplicity, stripping away complexity to make sure bystanders actually do something. And on the other, you see a focus on nuance and, government-funded public goods.
And that brings us to our central question today. Is this global push for simplicity in EMS? I'm talking specifically about hands-only CPR protocols and these streamlined, often privatized dispatch models. Is that actually the most effective way to save lives? Or in our drive to make things efficient and, yes, profitable, are we sacrificing medical precision and accessibility?
I think we're sacrificing quite a lot. I look at the landscape and I see a system, particularly in the US, that seems to prioritize profit over people, and a protocol that prioritizes ease of use over physiological reality. For me, the public good models, what we see in Taiwan and the evolving systems in China, they really expose a significant moral failure in the American approach.
And I'm here to represent the counterposition. The model led by the United States, high training for professionals, high resource privatization, coupled with the hands-only protocol for bystanders, is the necessary evolution of emergency care. It acknowledges the harsh reality of human psychology. In 2026, the priority has to be willingness to act. If the system is too complex, people they freeze. And if it isn't funded by user fees, it often lacks the capital for advanced innovation.
That is the capitalist argument for healthcare, certainly. But let's dig into the details.
Let's do it. So, for my position statement, I'll just lay out the reality as I see it. In 2026, the biggest enemy of survival in a cardiac arrest isn't a lack of medical knowledge. It is time. The data is just overwhelming that time to first compression is the single most critical factor. The United States and the American Heart Association have doubled down on hands-only or compression-only CPR for a very specific reason. It removes the friction.
Friction? You mean hesitation?
I mean the paralyzing friction of fear. Bystanders are terrified, they're afraid of mouth-to-mouth contact, they're afraid of infectious disease, and they are terrified of doing it wrong. By stripping the protocol down to push hard and fast in the center of the chest, we dramatically lower the barrier to entry. We turn a complex medical decision into a simple physical act. And what's more, the U.S. system, while yes, it's expensive, reflects an incredibly high standard of care. We aren't just sending a driver, we're sending a mobile intensive care unit. U.S. paramedics undergo, over 1,000 hours of training. They can intubate, they can administer cardiac medications. The cost reflects the capability. My core argument is that the best medical protocol in the world is useless if the bystander is too confused to start it. So simplicity, backed by high-resource professional care, saves the most lives in a mass population.
I come at it from a different way. I believe that in our pursuit of efficiency and this ease of use, we have completely overshadowed effectiveness and equity. You talk about simplicity saving lives, but we have to ask, whose lives? The source material confirms that while hands-only is great for a generic, sudden adult cardiac arrest, it is medically inferior for drowning victims, for drug overdoses, and for pediatric cases, situations where the arrest is respiratory in origin.
Right, but we have to acknowledge those are statistically fewer cases.
They are edge cases until it is your child in the swimming pool. By dumbing down the protocol to a one-size-fits-all push hard, we are essentially saying those lives matter less than the statistical average. And then there's the financial violence of the system. You defend the U.S. costs, but look at the reality. In Taiwan, emergency dispatch is free. It's funded by the fire department and national health insurance. In China, fees are regulated, maybe $7 to $30. In the US, a single ambulance ride creates a financial crater, $2,500 plus mileage plus surprise out-of-network bills. My argument is that we've optimized the US system for profit and for the average patient, leaving the vulnerable, children, the poor, drowning victims, at serious risk.
I see why you frame it that way, and I do want to get to the money, but let's start with the clinical side first. You're criticizing the shift to hands-only CPR as a dumbing down, but I would call it a physiological prioritization. We really need to unpack the concept of coronary perfusion pressure, or CPP, to understand why this shift happened.
Right, the pressure required to actually move blood through the heart muscle itself.
Exactly. Think of the vascular system like a series of pipes. When the heart stops, the pressure in those pipes drops to zero. Gravity takes over. To get blood up to the brain and into the heart muscle itself, you have to build that pressure back up through continuous rhythmic compressions. It's like priming a manual pump. It's not instantaneous. It takes several compressions just to get the pressure to a threshold where perfusion, the actual delivery of oxygen to the cells, even happens.
I don't dispute the mechanics of pressure. That's basic physiology.
But here is the key that I think the breaths advocates miss. The moment you stop compressions to give those two rescue breaths, that pressure doesn't just pause. It falls off a cliff. It drops precipitously back to zero. When you go back to the chest after the breaths, you are not picking up where you left off. You're starting from scratch. You're wasting critical seconds rebuilding pressure that you just lost.
That's true for a primary cardiac arrest, where the heart stops first, usually due to an electrical issue.
Which is the vast majority of cases in adults. And in those cases, the blood is still fully oxygenated at the moment of arrest. The body has a reservoir of oxygen in the bloodstream that lasts for those critical first few minutes. The priority is circulating the oxygen that is already there, not adding more. If we look at China, where public training rates are historically low, less than 5% in many areas, trying to teach a panicked caller how to tilt the head, lift the chin, and form a seal for breaths is, frankly, a disaster. It wastes 30, 40, 60 seconds. In the US, where we have the Cardiac Arrest Survival Act giving legal immunity, we can aggressively coach people to just push. We have to design for the reality of the untrained bystander, not the ideal of a medical textbook.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that entirely. You are treating this as a binary choice. Either we do complex CPR and fail, or we do hands-only and succeed. And that's a false dichotomy. You mentioned China and the US, but let's look at Taiwan. Taiwan has rapidly transitioned to simplified phrasing, yes, but they have integrated telecommunicator CPR, TCPR, as a medical authority.
How does a dispatcher on a headset change the physiology of the patient on the ground?
It changes the coaching. In Taiwan, the dispatcher is legally viewed as a medical authority. They use high-quality surveillance and standardized questioning. If the caller describes a drowning child, the protocol doesn't blindly say push. It recognizes the hypoxic nature of the event.
Meaning the lack of oxygen?
Exactly. The blood in a drowning victim has no oxygen left. It's been used up. Circulating it does nothing. You are effectively circulating deoxygenated sludge. By removing rescue breaths from the general public education to satisfy the lowest common denominator, we are accepting substandard care for these specific groups. A robust system uses the dispatcher to coach the correct CPR, not just the easiest CPR. We shouldn't just cut breaths out because they're hard to teach. We should improve how we teach them.
But that assumes the dispatcher can reliably diagnose the cause of arrest over the phone in seconds. The data suggests that is incredibly difficult. Bystanders are unreliable narrators. They scream, they cry, they give wrong information. If the dispatcher hesitates to decide, is this respiratory or cardiac, the patient dies. I would argue that the survivor cycle concept used in China, focusing on the pre, intra, and post-arrest, supports the idea that immediate circulation is the baseline. You can't save a brain that has had no blood flow for 10 minutes, regardless of the oxygen content.
That's a compelling argument for the first minute, perhaps. But have you considered the cost of access? We can debate physiology all day, but if the ambulance never comes because the family is afraid to call, the coronary perfusion pressure remains zero.
And this brings us right to the financial divide.
It does. And this is where the U.S. model becomes, to me, indefensible. You defended the U.S. costs earlier as paying for advanced life support. But let's look at the markup. In China, the ambulance dispatch fee is roughly 50 to 200 RMB, so that's about 7 to 30 US dollars. The mileage is pennies per kilometer. And in Taiwan, it is literally free for emergencies.
Well, free is a misnomer. It is tax-funded.
Correct. It is funded by the fire department and the national health insurance. It is treated as a public utility, exactly like the police or the fire brigade. When your house is burning down, the fire department doesn't ask for a credit card before turning on the hose. Yet in the US, the typical ambulance bill is anywhere from $400 to over $2,500, plus mileage at $40 a mile. Plus, and this is the kicker, surprise bills.
Okay, explain that for the listeners who might not be in the U.S. system, because it is complex.
In the U.S., the ambulance company might be a private entity contracted by the city. Even if you have health insurance, that specific ambulance company might be out of network. So you pay your premiums, you call 911 in a crisis, and a month later you get a bill for the full $3,000 because the specific paramedic who showed up works for a private equity firm that your insurance doesn't recognize. That isn't healthcare. That is a financial trap.
I see why you think that is a barrier, but let me give you a different perspective on the public utility model. The U.S. operates on what's called a tiered system. When you call 911 in the U.S., you aren't just getting a ride. You are getting a mobile emergency room. The labor costs for U.S. paramedics are high because their scope of practice is just massive compared to the historical models in Asia.
Is it really that different in 2026, though? Taiwan's EMTs and paramedics are fire-based, highly trained, and they perform advanced airway management and defibrillation. They just don't charge the patient $3,000 for it.
But look at the history in China. To understand the divergence, the system there was largely hospital-based. For a long time, the ambulance was often just transport, a shuttle to get you to the doctor. It is evolving, yes, but the U.S. model relies on private companies to fill the gaps that public funding simply won't cover. We have a fragmented system, true, some fire departments, some private companies, some hospital-based. But that fragmentation allows for coverage in areas that might otherwise have none. The user fee model puts the cost on the person consuming the high-resource service, rather than taxing everyone for a service they might never use.
That is a dangerous philosophy for emergency care. It implies that emergency rescue is a luxury good. You use the heart attack service, so you pay for it. We don't charge a user fee when the police stop a burglary. Why is medical rescue the only emergency service where we expect the victim to produce a payment method?
Because healthcare is distinct from public safety in the U.S. structure. It's treated as a service industry. And let's be honest, the private market drives innovation. The equipment on a U.S. ambulance, the telemetry that beams EKG data directly to the cardiologist before arrival, the automated compression devices like the Lucas machine, that technology is expensive. The U.S. market incentivizes companies to build better mousetraps because there's profit in it.
But is it accessible? In China, the government regulates these fees strictly. There's no surprise billing. In the U.S., we have documented cases of people taking an Uber to the hospital while having a heart attack because they are terrified of the ambulance bill. When people are self-triaging based on their bank balance rather than their chest pain, the system has failed.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because the dispatch system itself, the triage protocols, is designed to manage those resources. We aren't just sending a $3,000 asset to everyone who calls. And this brings us to the triage protocols, specifically the MPDS.
Go on.
In the U.S., we use sophisticated logic, often the medical priority dispatch system. Not every call gets a lights and sirens response. The decision tree is rigorous. If you call with shortness of breath, that triggers a specific dispatch level because it's a confirmed medical need. If there is non-response, it triggers a different level. You are paying for a sophisticated decision matrix that ensures the right resources get to the right place. It prevents the system from being clogged by non-emergencies, which is a massive problem in systems where the service is free.
That logic exists in Taiwan and China as well. Taiwan uses structured protocols.
China uses the 120 system, which is modernizing rapidly. The difference isn't the software. It's the willingness factor I mentioned earlier.
Willingness to call?
Exactly. You mentioned the shortness of breath trigger. In the US, if I have shortness of breath, I have to weigh my ability to breathe against my rent payment. In Taiwan, with Article 184 and the Emergency Medical Services Act protecting the system and no cost to the user, there is no hesitation. The US model creates hesitation before the call is even made. And it's not just financial hesitation, it's legal hesitation.
But we have addressed the hesitation regarding liability. The U.S. has strong Good Samaritan laws.
Liability, yes. But let's compare the legal frameworks. Look at China. Historically, the fear in China was extortion, the whole Peng Yu case effect. The idea that if you helped someone they would sue you, claiming you caused the injury. It paralyzed the nation for a decade. But the 2021 Civil Code changed that explicitly. They exempted bystanders from civil liability. They recognized that legal fear was killing people.
And the U.S. did the exact same thing, the Cardiac Arrest Survival Act.
But here is the nuance. The U.S. recognized that legal fear was killing people, so they fixed it. China recognized legal fear was killing people, so they fixed it. But only the U.S. seems fine with financial fear killing people. We protect the bystander from being sued, but we don't protect the victim from being bankrupted.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. The U.S. system prioritizes resource allocation through price signals. If we made ambulances free tomorrow, the system would be overwhelmed with non-emergencies, toe pain, minor cuts. The cost acts as a filter, however imperfect. And regarding the Good Samaritan aspect, the U.S. federal protections allow for something unique: aggressive coaching. The dispatcher can scream, "Push harder, you are keeping him alive," without fear of being sued for practicing medicine without a license. That allows for the hands-only intensity that saves lives.
And yet, Taiwan achieves high satisfaction and rapid urban response without the cost barrier. They prove you can have high-tech EMS, TCPR, quality surveillance, advanced protocols without the financial ruin. They treat it as a public good.
But Taiwan is a small, densely populated island. The logistics are just different from the sprawling geography of the U.S. or the massive scale of China. You can't just copy-paste the funding model of an island nation to a continent-spanning country with rural gaps.
The geography challenges the response time, sure, but the philosophy is what matters. The philosophy of who pays for survival.
I want to circle back to the central tension of simplicity before we close. You seem to think we are losing something vital by moving away from breadths. But in 2026, looking at the data, the sheer number of people who simply do nothing is the tragedy we're trying to solve. Hands-only CPR is the democratization of saving a life. It takes a complex medical procedure and says, you, the person on the street, you can do this. We are turning bystanders into bioengine.
I agree that doing something is better than doing nothing, but we must be careful not to confuse better than nothing with medically optimal. Hands-only is a pragmatic compromise. It is a concession to our failure to train the public.
It is a concession to reality.
Perhaps, but when we look at the survivor cycle in China or the integrated quality standards in Taiwan, they are striving to lift the bystander's capability, not just lower the bar.
And I would argue the U.S. is lifting the capability by removing the mental blocks. We are enabling action.
We are coming to the end of our time, and the divide is clear.
It is. So let's summarize our positions.
I'll start. I look at the global state of EMS in 2026, and I see a dangerous trade-off. While hands-only CPR is a pragmatic solution for untrained bystanders, we have to admit it represents a compromise of the medical ideal, specifically regarding rescue breaths, for the sake of simplicity. We are accepting that some, like drowning victims, will receive substandard care because we assume the public isn't smart enough to learn the alternative. Furthermore, I reject the U.S. financial model. The comparison with Taiwan and China shows that emergency care can and should be a public good. You should not have to choose between financial ruin and physical ruin in the back of an ambulance.
And I see it differently. The goal of EMS is continuous circulation and immediate action. The U.S. model and the global shift toward hands-only CPR acknowledges the reality of human psychology. We remove the barriers of complexity and fear of disease. And regarding the financial model, while expensive, The U.S. system drives innovation and ensures that when a bystander acts, they are backed by the most advanced, aggressive, legal, and medical framework in the world. Simplicity in instruction, coupled with specialization in professional care, ultimately saves the most lives in a mass population.
It is a complex equation: speed versus precision, public good versus private service.
It is, but there's one thing we definitely agree on.
Absolutely. Whether you're in Beijing, Taipei, or Los Angeles, the technology and the billing don't matter if no one acts.
The most critical factor remains the bystander's willingness to make the call and put hands on the chest.
So we encourage our listeners to look deeper into their own local protocols. Know what your dispatcher will ask you.
And don't be afraid to act. Thanks for listening to the debate.
Until next time.